Good morning and welcome to the Morrow and Midwest Employers Casualty webinar for preventing slips, trips, and falls. Today is Friday, June 23rd. We appreciate your participation in this webinar. Our presenter today is Daryl Tenius. Daryl has presented on webinars for us before, previously with Morrow, and we really appreciate his support and helping to keep our workplaces safe. So I will, at this moment, now turn it over to Daryl. And Daryl, thanks again for taking care of this webinar for me.
Oh, you're most welcome, Gloria. Happy to do it. And again, good morning, everyone. I hope we're all looking forward to the weekend. I know that I am. So, you know, we often think of a slip, trip, or a fall to be something that simply happens maybe when we're not paying attention. And we usually think of it as something minor, but not always. When I was working for a healthcare organization, we had a nurse that slipped and fell when she was simply walking down the hall. She fractured her right ankle. She had to have screws and plates inserted, and her recovery was really going along quite nicely until all of a sudden it wasn't. We found out that she was a non-compliant diabetic, and as a result, her toe had to be amputated, and then her foot had to be amputated. The diabetes then wreaked havoc on her vision, and she became blind in one eye. She was deemed a permanent total disability, and the case cost my previous employer over $1 million. I have a client right now here at Midwest that had an employee that slipped and fell running after a patient that had dementia. So she wanted to catch him before he eloped out the door. It ultimately resulted in a below-the-knee leg amputation. Now, you know, I don't want to be all doom and gloom today on Friday, especially at the beginning of this presentation, but I think it's important that we understand that slips, trips, and falls can, in fact, be very serious. Okay, page is not moving down for me now. There we go. So today, we're going to define what a slip is, what a trip is, and what a fall is. And I know we usually lump all of these together, but they really are different and present unique characteristics, and therefore how we address them varies. We'll learn what needs to be part of a slips, trips, and falls prevention program. We'll understand the factors that contribute to slips, trips, and falls. We'll talk about ways that you can prevent slips, trips, and falls. And then we'll conclude by talking about the 9 top errors in addressing slip, trip, and falls. Okay, sorry for the delay here. I'm not sure what happened. Okay. Did you know that the most common injury at work is a slip, trip, or fall? Did you know that slip, trip, and falls are the second leading cause of death in the workplace, only behind automobile crashes? Did you know that there are 12,000 workplace slip, trip, and falls every year and represent 25% of all claims? Did you know that more than 17% of all disabling injuries at work are from falls? For nearly all of my clients, slip, trips, and falls are either their #1 cause of injury or their #2 cause of injury. I'm not sure why the slides are not advancing. I apologize.
Daryl, it's saying that you have the control, but what I can do is I will forward the slides for you. There we go.
Okay, and I'll just say next. How's that?
Okay, that'll be fine.
Okay, all right, thanks. So let's start out by understanding the difference between a slip, trip, and a fall. A slip is when someone loses their balance because there's not enough friction between the shoe that they're wearing and the walking surface, usually a floor. This lack of friction can be caused by a lot of different things, like spills on the floor, wet or oily surfaces, rain, snow, ice, or it can be caused by a loose carpet, a rug, a mat, or even flooring that has become worn over time. So then, how is a trip different from a slip? Next. A trip happens when you hit something that causes you to lose your balance and you may or may not fall. There might be an obstructed view and you can't see what's in front of you. You might be carrying a stack of boxes like the guy you see in the photo on the screen. There might be poor lighting. This is especially common in places like stairwells, closets, parking lots, and garages. There could be some kind of clutter in the way. Carpet could be worn or frayed or buckled. Cables and cords might be laying around uncovered. We might forget to close a drawer and then trip over it. I'm guilty of that. I've done that. And it's common to encounter uneven walking surfaces or where surfaces change from one type to another. For instance, you may be in a building that there's tile, and then you move to carpet, then to wood, then perhaps to yet another flooring surface. Typically, our gait, how we walk, doesn't change based upon the different levels of friction that we encounter in these different walking surfaces, and therefore we may trip. Door thresholds also can be a frequent cause of trips. Okay, next. A fall occurs when we lose our balance and actually drop to the floor. And there are really three types of falls. The most common is a fall on the same level. You first slip or trip, and that causes you to fall onto the same level in which you're standing. Or you can fall to a lower level. You might be on a ladder or on stairs and then fall. Or it might involve an intentional jump to a lower level. Not a good idea. So to get a better understanding of falls, let's talk about the dynamics of slip and falls. Okay, next. I thought it might be helpful for us to walk through how slip and falls actually happen. So our body's center of gravity is near the hip area. And as we walk, our right foot slides forward, which causes our right heel to lose some of its friction. Next. And when we lose enough friction, our right foot then slides forward even more. And when our left foot can no longer provide the support needed, our center of gravity naturally falls backward. Next. Then the center of gravity pulls our body backward and we fall. And we might hit our butt on the floor, or sometimes our hip, or even our head. So what are the real culprits of slip and falls? Next. 50% of slip and fall accidents are caused by the flooring itself. Perhaps not enough friction, maybe too much friction, or maybe there's a spill on the floor. 24% of falls are caused by what we're wearing on our feet, our shoe choice. And according to the National Floor Safety Institute, 10% of slip, trips, and falls are actually fraudulent. Since half of all slip, trips, and falls are caused by the flooring, let's talk about how we can determine the true condition of our floor. Next. The condition of a floor can be measured by what's called the coefficient of friction, and that's the amount of friction between the floor or another walking surface and the bottom of your shoe. The coefficient of friction can range anywhere from 0.1 to 1.0, depending on the walking surface and the shoe. The key is the relationship between those two. Next. So we might say 1 part floor and 1 part shoe is the solution. Or maybe I should say 1 part dry, clean, level floor and 1 part proper slip-resistant shoe. But how do we know if the floor has the right amount of traction or friction? There are actually devices that can be used to measure a floor's coefficient of friction, and we'll talk about these a little bit more in just a minute. Some organizations have what they call a floor auditing program to ensure that they're complying with industry standards for safe floors, to have a systematic process for properly maintaining floors, and if needed, to help strengthen their defense in a legal claim. And most importantly, to identify high-risk areas that can require attention so that slips, trips, and falls can be prevented or at least reduced. When auditing or inspecting floors, it's important to look at floor transitions as we talked about earlier. Next. Lots of changing floor transitions here. Marble, carpet, tile, entrance mat, and there are other trip and fall hazards that we really haven't talked about yet. Curbs. Next. Here we have curbs that really don't have any contrast. It's nice to have a warning when a surface is about to change, and curbs and steps that have good visual contrast pose a lower risk. Next, like these. As you can see here, all the steps, the curbs are clearly marked. So what about stairs? Next. Stairs are also cause of a lot of slips, trips, and falls, and their design and construction are important factors to consider, like the width, the depth, and the height of each step, so that they fit the majority of most people. Stairs that have handrails are much safer than those that don't. And it's important to make sure that the handrails are positioned at a height that accommodates the majority of people. Having some kind of tread on the steps can also reduce slips. It also helps to make sure that the width, the depth, and the rise, or the height of each step, stays consistent. Because when there's a different height, as you're walking along, again, you kind of walk at the same gait, the same pace, and if the step is higher or lower, it can become a trip hazard. And having some kind of tread on the step can help reduce slips as well. It also helps to make sure that that you use non-slip materials. And now that we've talked about the main causes of slips, trips, and falls, let's look at programs that can effectively address them. Many organizations have a formal fall management program, which includes responsibility by management, a process for proper floor selection and treatment, housekeeping and maintenance procedures, and an effective loss prevention and control program. Next. So who should be involved? Start with those that actually design the building, and thus the floors. And these are going to be the architects. Include those that are responsible for the physical aspects of the building, like facilities management. Those responsible for prevention, that being risk and safety. Those responsible for cleaning and maintaining the floors and walking surfaces, housekeeping and maintenance. Those who are responsible for ensuring that safety practices are adhered to, the human resource folks. Those responsible should litigation arise, legal counsel. In addition to management responsibility, selecting the right floor is key. Next. So when your organization is looking at building a new structure or simply changing out a floor, you should ask several important questions. Given what is done in the area, what kind of spills might you expect? Are there any special sanitary requirements? Do you expect the area to have high traffic, like a lobby or a waiting room? Is the area prone to becoming wet, perhaps like a cafeteria or a shower or a pool area? What emphasis is being placed on aesthetics? You know, will that make the floor more hazardous? We all want our facilities to be these beautiful, gleaming places, but sometimes the aesthetics get in the way of safety, or can get in the way of safety. Where will the floor be installed? Does the area have a single purpose, or might it serve several purposes? So how does one know if a floor might be a hazard? Next. If you want to check to see if a floor, either a new one that you're considering or an existing floor, whether or not it has the proper amount of friction, there's actually a device that can help you do that. And these devices are called slip meters. This particular meter is used only on dry floors. Next. But there are also devices such as this one that will tell you the coefficient of friction when the floor is wet. Of course, every organization tries to prevent floors from getting wet, and one thing that can be highly effective are the use of mats. Next. Actually, one of the most common housekeeping practices in preventing slips, trips, and falls is using floor mats. These are often used at entrances and in kitchen areas. So the mats help trap moisture. They can also help protect the floor and thus can reduce floor maintenance, floor repair, and replacement costs. But they should be used in such a way that they themselves do not create an additional hazard. Edges can curl up on the mat, they can become buckled, or they can become overly saturated with moisture and should be replaced. So while they really help prevent slip and falls, you have to make sure to properly maintain them so that they in themselves don't become an additional risk. As with any potential hazard, prevention is critical. Next. Most successful loss prevention programs have 3 key steps. Risks are identified for developing and implementing training to address those risks, then making sure you clearly document what you've done. So let's look a little bit more in detail in each of these areas. Next. The first thing that should be done is a physical inspection of all areas. Be sure to look especially close at those areas where the most slip, trip, and falls are occurring, like entrances, hallways, sidewalks, parking lots and parking garages, steps, stairwells, ramps, It may vary from organization to organization, but these tend to be the most common areas that we see slip, trip, and falls. And an organization needs to identify risks everywhere on the property. Start inside by inspecting floors and surfaces that might be worn, that might be uneven, or deteriorated because of age or perhaps excessive use. Check for unsecured carpets and rugs. Many offices and buildings have terrazzo floors or marble floors, so keep in mind that this type of surface becomes very slippery when it gets wet. And we need to look at areas that have varying levels, like stairs. Next. Stairs pose many inherent dangers. Many are poorly lit. They sometimes have steps that have irregular risers, particularly in older buildings. Steps may have become damaged over time. There might not be sufficient landings between staircases to allow for a brief rest or to resituate oneself. And many times there are doors that actually swing into the path of others walking up or down the stairs. Next. Once you've inspected inside, you should turn your attention to the outside, especially parking lots and garages. This is where a large number of slip, trip, and falls happen. Look for cracks, potholes, excessive deterioration, weather-related items like rain, snow, or ice accumulations. And look for areas that might be inadequately lit. After inspecting your facility, training then should take place. Next. Training of staff typically should include teaching them how to identify hazards, like cleaning up water, and to have an understanding of the effects of slips, trips, and falls on the organization, both financially as well as from the human perspective, and how it can impact the lives of their employees. Next. Training should also include teaching employees how to warn others of hazards when they can't be corrected immediately. This includes things like signs and blocking off areas. Along with management commitment, effective loss prevention programs and adequate training, in addition to those things, documentation is also essential. Next. The final step is to document your procedures in everything you do. So why should you bother? Well, for OSHA compliance, for Joint Commission compliance if you're a healthcare facility, and for litigation protection. If litigation arises out of a slip, trip, or fall, it's going to be very important to show and verify that your organization took a reasonable standard of care in ensuring that your premises are safe. Documenting your inspections and maintenance procedures provides evidence that your organization has done just that. Next. So documentation should include inspection logs to record who did the inspection and when it was done. Maintenance logs should show repairs that were done and by whom. And documentation should show that the process for reporting hazards is quick, easy, and mandatory. So now that we've talked about what you should do, I thought it might be helpful to hear what not to do, the common mistakes many organizations make. Here are the 9 top mistakes organizations make when addressing slips, trips, and falls. Error 1, they're not using a structured, multifaceted process. Error 2, they choose the wrong flooring. Error 3, they do not have proper cleaning procedures. Error 4, they do not have an effective spill and contaminant response plan. Error 5, they permit employees to wear the wrong shoes. Error 6, not have effective signage. Error 8, they do not integrate procedures with daily activities. And error 9, they do not follow up. So let's look at these each a little bit closer. Effective programs need flow and need to have components that dovetail into one another, a seamless process that interacts with every other step of the way, from the initial planning through implementation and compliance. Next. Consider all the implications when choosing a floor, from the way it will look, to how much you can spend, from evaluating how previous floor choices have performed, to determining the level of slip resistance needed. And you should consider what the expected use of the area will be so that the floor is compatible with that use. Make sure that appropriate cleaning products are used that will result in the consequences you intend. Make sure that the right cleaning equipment is used so that the floors are not too smooth and not too rough. And make sure that an effective cleaning process is in place and always followed. Know what type of spills are likely to occur. Know the most effective ways to detect those spills, and know how to prevent spills, and when they do occur, how to get them corrected promptly. And have a robust root cause analysis performed on every spill. Have a mandatory footwear policy and program. Shoes need to be slip resistant. And you can consider piloting vendor products. They're very happy to, to provide some samples and have employees try those out. And the program should include a maintenance and replacement schedule and process for the footwear. Floor maintenance should include planned physical inspections. There should be a process to identify hazards and a process to quickly address issues when identified, and then a schedule to follow up to ensure that that correction is still working. An essential part of any successful slip, trip, and fall program is consistent use of effective signage. In addition to traditional signs and cones, you might use tape or painted markings to cordon off areas. Ensure that signage is placed properly and does not unintendedly distract others from a particular hazard. And make sure that there is adequate lighting to make the warning visible. Some organizations do a great job of putting together a binder of policies, programs, and procedures, but never really incorporate it into the daily activities of their employees. So they complete this binder for compliance purposes, but they really sometimes don't put it into action. So if they get inspected, that it doesn't really filter down to the employees that are impacted, and that will be clear. And even organizations that develop and implement sound slip, trip, and fall programs often fail to follow up by evaluating for effectiveness and continuously looking for ways to improve the program. So today we talked about the importance of proper traction and friction on flooring and other walking surfaces. We discussed making good flooring choices to reduce the likelihood of falls. We discussed proper floor maintenance and housekeeping responsibilities. We talked about the importance of identifying slip, trip, and fall hazards through inspection. And lastly, we talked about the benefits of documentation. So I hope everyone learned something from today that you can take back to your organizations and maybe even improve the way you're currently doing things. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. I really appreciate that presentation. One of the things I like to share with our group is that slips, trips, and falls continue to be the highest number of incidents among our members, which is something that it happens probably a lot, so sometimes we don't pay as much attention. But again, we need to put that focus back on preventing slips, trips, and falls by looking at the things that Daryl talked about and shared with us today. Great information, really appreciate it, Daryl. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I should also share with you, if you want more information about slips, trips, and falls or posters or whatever, give me a call or email me. Most of you know my phone number and email address, area code 517-484-5588, or at gmcmullen@marrow.org. Another source for information is through MIOSHA. They also have quite a few publications out there as well as it relates to slips, trips, and falls. Again, you have a lot of resources available to help make sure that we are reducing the number of injuries that are occurring in this area. At this time, I am going to conclude the recording of this webinar, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Again, Daryl, thank you for your time.
You're most welcome. Happy to do it.